Okay, gotta be honest. Some mornings, I need that caffeine to get going. But I've been wondering lately, does it actually help when I work out or not?
It's interesting because caffeine, it's not just about getting you going in the morning. We're going to get into that today. Caffeine's effect on athletic performance, but also just everyday life. We've got some research here, a whole scientific review on caffeine and sports performance, and even some studies on how it affects everyone.
Okay, cool. So this deep dive is all about caffeine then. What exactly is it? How does it work? Benefits, drawbacks.
Exactly. So first, what is caffeine? It's a psychoactive stimulant, and it's in way more things than you think. Coffee, obviously, tea, chocolate, even some medications, and of course all those energy drinks.
Huh. So it's not just my morning coffee giving me that boost.
Right, and it's a stimulant because it goes right to your brain. Blocks something called adenosine receptors. So adenosine is a molecule, builds up in your brain as the day goes on,
Yeah.
and it makes you feel tired. Caffeine basically blocks it.
It's just like pausing the tired feeling.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. That's why you feel more alert after coffee, more focused. But just like hitting the snooze button, it's only temporary.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
What about athletic performance?
Well, research shows caffeine can help. It can enhance performance. But here's the thing. The effects are different for everyone and different for different sports. For example, endurance sports, like cycling or running long distances, those see the most consistent benefits.
Right. The longer you're going, the more tired you get. Seems like caffeine could really help there.
Exactly. But even in things like rowing or swimming sprints, short bursts, high intensity, we still see positive effects from caffeine.
So even if you're not running a marathon,
Hmm,
could still make a difference in a workout.
it could. And there's research on team sports, too. Seems like caffeine helps there as well. Combating mental fatigue, improving concentration.
Speaking of mental fatigue, I remember reading about those military studies
Hmm.
on caffeine, how it affected soldiers on long missions.
Right. They found it helps them stay alert, especially without sleep. And again, it comes back to adenosine, blocking adenosine. It not only reduces how tired you feel, but also how you perceive pain. That might be why some athletes can push through discomfort. Caffeine helps them handle the fatigue.
Like an extra mental edge.
Exactly. Now, dosage. General guideline for athletes. 3 to 6 milligrams of caffeine per kilogram of body weight. So a 70-kilogram athlete, that's about 210 to 420 milligrams of caffeine.
Is there a way to, I don't know, translate that into cups of coffee? Something we can all relate to.
Well, it's tricky. The caffeine in coffee, it varies a lot. But even if you knew the exact amount, coffee isn't really the best way to get caffeine before competing.
Yeah, I can see that. Not chugging a latte before a big race.
Plus, coffee has other things in it. Could upset your stomach. A lot of athletes use anhydrous caffeine tablets.
Right.
Or gum, or gels, or pre-workout supplements. You've got more control that way. And you avoid stomach problems.
So it depends on the athlete then. Travel schedule, their routines before competing, even just what they prefer.
Exactly. And then this brings up something really important about caffeine and performance. It's not enough to just know the guidelines. You have to figure out what works best for you.
I like that. Like taking control of your performance.
Yeah.
Through experimenting.
That's it. Me-search, I call it. And here's a good example. From the Beijing Winter Olympics. In that source, caffeine and sports performance. Pros, cons, and considerations. They talk about 2 different cross-country skiers.
Okay, this sounds interesting.
So one skier, he was focused on those long-distance races. He used smaller doses of caffeine, split them up throughout the race. The other skier, he was competing in those short, intense sprints. He preferred to take a bigger dose before each round. So you see, even in the same sport, athletes have to figure out what works for them, their event, how they respond to caffeine.
That's a great example. But
Well,
what about the downsides of caffeine? You said the effects are temporary. So what happens when that boost wears off?
that's a great question. And it's something we'll get into after a quick...
Oh, hold on. You mentioned downsides before. Anything specific athletes should watch out for?
You're right, we should talk about that. One thing to remember, more caffeine isn't always better. If you go above 9 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, you can get some bad side effects, anxiety, stomach problems, even heart palpitations.
So it's all about finding that sweet spot where it helps you but doesn't hurt you.
Exactly. Moderation and figuring out what works for you, those are key. Now, let's shift gears a bit. Talk about how caffeine affects everyday life. For those of us who aren't elite athletes,
Yeah, that's what I'm curious about. Does that cup of coffee every morning really make a difference?
it might surprise you. A lot of what we said about athletes, it applies to everyday life too. We'll explore that after a chew. We'll just stay tuned. So think about it. If caffeine helps athletes fight fatigue, helps them focus better. It can probably help with those Monday morning blahs, too, or that afternoon slump at work.
Yeah. So that extra coffee before a presentation or
Yeah.
late night studying, it's not just a placebo effect.
Yeah.
Then,
Right. Caffeine does improve alertness, focus, even mood, for most people at least. But
yeah,
just like with athletes, the effects don't last forever. And everyone responds differently. What gives you a boost might make someone else jittery and anxious.
that's true. And we can't forget about the downsides either, like messing up your sleep, especially if you have caffeine too late.
You're absolutely right. Caffeine can be a tool for better performance in sports and life. But you have to be smart about it. Think about how it affects your sleep. Good sleep is so important for your body, your mind, everything.
So timing is key. No late night espressos if you want to sleep well. But there's another thing I've heard about caffeine, that it dehydrates you. Is that true?
It's a common myth. Caffeine is a diuretic, so it does make you pee more. But studies show it doesn't really dehydrate most people, even athletes.
No need to skip that pre-workout coffee then, or the afternoon pick-me-up.
Exactly. As long as you're hydrating overall. Moderate caffeine's no problem. Now, here's an interesting thing. This applies to everyone, athletes or not. Caffeine might actually help your muscles recover after exercise.
Really? You mean like that post-workout coffee could be doing me good?
It's possible, but the research is still new, especially at lower doses. The study showing the benefit, they used really high doses. Probably not a good idea for everyone.
Okay, so
Mhm.
not a guaranteed benefit, but something to consider, you know? We've talked a lot about the science of caffeine, how it affects our bodies, but I'm curious about the history too, especially in sports. Wasn't it banned for athletes at one point?
It was. It's a great question, actually. It shows how our understanding of caffeine has changed. Back in the day, caffeine was a performance-enhancing drug, banned by the Olympics, all those organizations.
Wow, so athletes couldn't even have coffee before competing?
Nope. They thought it gave athletes an unfair advantage. But there were problems with that approach. First, the urine tests they used. Not very reliable. Everyone metabolizes caffeine differently. Two athletes could have the same amount, but their urine tests would show different levels.
So it didn't really show who was using caffeine to cheat.
Exactly. And here's the second problem. The amount of caffeine that enhances performance. It's often within the range of normal consumption.
So you could have a cup of coffee just because, and technically have performance-enhancing levels of caffeine.
That's right. Made the ban really hard to enforce. So, in 2004, caffeine was taken off the banned list. They realized moderate caffeine is generally safe.
And I read that caffeine use in elite sports hasn't really gone up since then. It's not like everyone's suddenly using it to get an edge.
It seems like athletes are being strategic, part of their overall nutrition and training plan. This change is a good thing, I think, going from a total ban to understanding caffeine better.
I agree. We can talk about it more openly now. The good and the bad. Athletes can make informed decisions.
Exactly. It's not caffeine good or caffeine bad. It's more complex than that.
Speaking of complex, you mentioned earlier that caffeine can be complicated for long-term health. What did you mean by that?
Well, there have been studies. They suggest a link between caffeine and type 2 diabetes, but like a lot of things in nutrition, it's not a simple answer. We need more research.
So, something to keep in mind. Maybe do some more reading, especially if you're worried about diabetes.
Exactly. Always good to stay informed. Make choices that are right for your health.
Okay. We covered a lot today. What are some key takeaways for our listener?
I think the main thing is caffeine can be a powerful tool for athletes, for everyday life, but everyone responds differently. The dose, the timing, the source, it all matters. What works for one person might not work for another. Experiment to find what's best for you.
Right. Like we said before, me search.
Hmm.
Figure out your own caffeine journey.
Exactly. And while moderate caffeine is generally safe, there are downsides to watch out for. Too much caffeine, or having it too late.
Right. Pay attention to how it affects your sleep, your mood, how you feel overall.
Exactly. And maybe the most important takeaway here, we rely on caffeine so much that we might not realize maybe we just need more rest.
That's interesting. Like we're always hitting that caffeine button, but not fixing the real problem.
It's true. Caffeine can be helpful, but it's not a substitute for taking care of yourself.
We're so used to just grabbing that coffee
Yeah.
that we might forget. Maybe we just need to rest more.
Yeah, exactly. Caffeine's a tool, but it shouldn't be replacing taking care of yourself.
I think that's important. We want the quick fix instead of figuring out why we're tired in the first place.
It all goes back to that me search we talked about. It's not just about the caffeine dose. It's about understanding your body, how it works, your natural rhythms, and improving your overall health.
So it's like
Yeah,
finding that balance, using caffeine when you need it, but also making sure you're resting enough, eating well, managing stress, all those things that give you energy naturally.
that's it. And
Yeah,
you might even
exactly.
find you don't need as much caffeine when you do all that.
That's a good point. It's not about saying caffeine is bad. It's about using it wisely and
Mhm.
having other healthy habits too.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. Caffeine is fascinating, really. It can be good, it can be bad. In the end, you have to learn about it, experiment a bit, and find what works for you.
Absolutely. This has been a really interesting deep dive. I learned a lot about caffeine. Hope our listeners did too,
It's been great exploring this with you. I always like these deep dives. They remind you there's always more to learn.
for sure. And for our listeners, if you're trying to improve your performance, whether it's in sports, at work, or just in life, caffeine can help. But it's not the only answer.
Rest is important. Eat well, manage your stress. Don't be afraid to try things out. See what works best for you.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.